Welcome to Bengals Real Talk in New Stripe City, a podcast for diehard Bengals fans. I'm your host, Ace Boogie. My co-host G is here as usual. And today we have a special guest. We have Marc Herman from the AFC Northerners. And today we'll actually be recapping the first 50 list. And so, Marc, please tell them who you are, a little bit of insight on how you became a fan and where they can find your stuff.
Okay, yeah, my name is Marc Herman. My Twitter handle is LA Bengal Fan on Twitter. Also, I am one of the Bengal representatives on a show that just covers the AFC North called AFC Northerners. You can find me, obviously, on Twitter at LA Bengal Fan, and you can also find me on Facebook as LA Bengal Fan. And then AFC Northerners are on every social platform, Reddit, Twitter, Facebook, everything. So, and we're AFC Northerners at gmail.com if you want to email us. So, and I actually have an interesting story about how I became a Bengal fan. I'm born in Texas, moved to Los Angeles when I was a year old. My dad was a huge Packer fan, diehard. Used to go to, I don't know if people will know this, but they used to play 2 games a year in Milwaukee. So they played 6 in Lambeau, 2 in Milwaukee. My dad went to every game in Milwaukee growing up. So when he comes to Los Angeles, you know, and gets married and has kids, he raises me to not be a fair weather fan. He's a Packer fan. My parents' first date was a Ram-Packer game at the Coliseum in the 50s. And so he basically raised me that way. So I'm 5 years old. In 1968, the Bengals come out. And I go, oh, I'm going to like this team from the beginning. I mean, they had a lot of things going for them. I'm 5 years old, so they had a quarterback whose name I could pronounce. His name was Greg Cook, so not a problem for a 5-year-old to spell that out. I loved the logo, and I just said, I'm going to be a fan of this team from the beginning. And here we are 50 years later, and didn't realize I was signing up to be like the Cub fan of football, but that's how things work out. And like I said, I was raised so to not be a fair weather fan, and I've been through them from the beginning, through thick and thin, more thin than thick. But so that's it. That's my story about becoming a Bengal fan. I don't know anybody else who kind of has that same story who's not from the Cincinnati area. So it's and you have to remember something. Being in Los Angeles in the 70s and 80s, especially in the 70s, there's no satellite TV. There's no ESPN. Cable's just starting up, but it hasn't existed yet. I mean, you got, 2 games a week. You got them on your local channels. And being here, I had the Rams. I mean, I was stuck getting Ram data. When you watched the sports that night on the news, you got Ram highlights. You didn't get any Bengal highlights. And so you had to rely on reading the paper the next day and getting the AP, whoever covered the Bengal game, from the Associated Press, that was what you read in the LA Times the next day. Also, there was Monday Night Football that came about at the end of the 60s. And Howard Cosell would do these the halftime highlights on Monday night. Well, that was really a chance for other people from other markets to see that the 2 or 3 plays that Cosell would show, that might be the only plays you saw from that game for the week. We're so used to being able to see every game with NFL Sunday Ticket and ESPN, and that just wasn't available back then. So it was difficult. You had to be, like if you're following anybody from another market, but you didn't have the outlets you had today. So it was work, but you did it. That's what you didn't know any better. There wasn't anything else out there. So
wow, that's very impressive. Very impressive, man. That's one of the reasons that we actually brought Marc on today, because as you guys know, the Bengals released the first 50 list, and majority of the players on the list are from, the 70s and 80s. And, me and G, we can't really give you guys the proper insight because, we're more so from the 90s and the 2000s. But we wanted to bring Marc on here to be able to break down and give his insight of the team. Obviously, you've heard he's been with the team from the beginning. So who better to have on here? Now, with that being said, Marc, could you please summarize, some of the players, not all of them, but some of the players on the top 50 list that played within the 70s and in the 80s?
Okay, well, here, because I'm one of the elder statesmen, I have to actually get my glasses out now. So that'll show my age here. But you're looking at like the top 10 or 15, and most of them, if you see, they break down into 2 teams. They break down into our 81 season, 82 Super Bowl team. And that was the Kenny Anderson team coached by Forrest Gregg. And then obviously you have the 1988 team, the 89 Super Bowl. That was the Sam Weish team. So most of them come from that, and deservedly so. I mean, that if you check, and I don't know the exact records, but if you check, we lost most of our games in the 70s to the Steelers. If you check the 80s, I'm almost sure it was almost flip-flopped. I mean, like it was 14-6 for the Steelers in the 70s, and I wouldn't be surprised if it was 12-8 or 14-6 for us winning the games, because we pretty much dominated that decade. Going through the list, rightfully so, Anthony Munoz deserves to be the number one guy. He was the anchor of our offensive line for both of those teams, not just one of them. So you look at like number 13 with Max Montoya. He's drafted in 79, and you look at Anthony Munoz drafted in 80. You see the formation of the line that's going to dominate for the next 10 years. I mean, those are like your two anchors. You've also got Trim Crumry, who was drafted after the 81 Super Bowl, but he is, Crumry is the Geno Atkins of the 88-89 team, that era. So the early 80s all the way through his career, and Crumry played till 94. He's Geno Atkins. If you watch, it rained a lot the night before Super Bowl 23, and the field was very soggy. And we lost Tim Crumry on the very first snap of the game that our defense was out there. He completely shredded his knee on just what was a soggy field. And had we had Crumry the whole game, I mean, that game's not even close. I mean, without Crumry, we should have won that game. We had multiple chances, and we had the lead with 34 seconds left. But that's like losing Geno Atkins. You know the difference in our defense when Geno leaves the field versus when Geno's on the field. Same thing with Crumry. Crumry was that kind of a player, and rightfully so, being number 3 on the list. I actually tweeted him when the list came out, and he gave me a nice like on my tweet, because I said, well-deserved number 3 there. So congratulations. Great guy, and a high character guy too. And then Kenny Anderson, had Boomer had a longer career, he might have rivaled Kenny's career, but Kenny did not have everything. I mean, he was on that team through all the Steel Curtain days. So this is a guy that really, his Super Bowl, it was nice that he got there, because he kind of got some of the recognition that he got, that he got, came at the end of his career when he was towards the end. So it was good that he got to a Super Bowl. It's a shame that he went and became a Steeler coach. I know his only Super Bowl ring is a coach's ring for the Steelers, but Kenny Anderson and that team was more of a run-oriented team. But Kenny Anderson, I think, held the record for until it was broken, I think 21 straight completions in the game. So, and he set a lot of Super Bowl records in the 81 Super Bowl. Interesting story on the 81 team is that you got to remember, I've given you the perspective. I've already laid the groundwork with what the news sources were like. You don't get a lot of Bengals. Like I said, we wouldn't get a lot of Bengals games. So the Bengals start that year out, they're 4-2, but nobody really believes them. You got to remember, we're coming out of an era where the Steelers have now had won 4 of the last 6 Super Bowls, right? So the Bengals finally have their Week 7 matchup. They're 4-2. They're going to play the Pittsburgh Steelers, and everybody thinks, okay, now we're going to see who the Bengals are. They finally get to a nationally televised game. They're the game of the week, Sunday morning, Bengals Steelers, right? What the Bengals did was play themselves right off national television. They scored on their first 6 possessions. They were leading 34-0 at halftime. And here in Los Angeles, they said, oh, we're going to switch you to a more competitive game. So it was like, I wait all year to see the Bengals, and I only get a half. Granted, I would not trade it, because watching the Bengals score 34 consecutive points in the first half against the Steelers was pretty gratifying. And then they got a little more airtime, and obviously, went to the Super Bowl that season with a 12-4 record. But it was funny how they played themselves basically right off national television. Going through the rest of the list, one of the key guys here, and I can't emphasize this enough, is David Fulcher at number 6. David Fulcher redefined the safety position. I mean, you think about Sean Taylor and Troy Polamalu and all those guys. He's the one who really led the way for that. The Bengals coaching staff, you got to remember, the Bengals, Bill Walsh studied under Paul Brown, went to San Francisco. Sam Weish also went to San Francisco. And it's funny because they talk about the West Coast offense, but it's really an Ohio River offense. I heard somebody on, I think it was Bengals.com or Cincinnati.com, talk about that. It might have been the Cincinnati Enquirer, talk about how it's an Ohio River offense. That's where it was developed. It was developed in the Bengal organization under Paul Brown with Bill Walsh and Sam Weish. Sam Weish comes back to coach, and his defensive coordinator is Dick LeBeau. So they bring that quote unquote Ohio, West Coast offense there. David Fulcher is a product of needing to shut down what we called the sugar huddle, the no huddle. All that was developed in the West Coast by especially by Sam Weish. You saw it, made popular by the Bills in the 90s. But that offense was born. They used to call it the cuddle huddle, but the players didn't like that, so they renamed it the sugar huddle. But that's where they would just stand like 2 yards off the ball and kind of talk. And if they saw the substitutions coming in, they'd run to the line, snap the ball, and get the flag. That's all an advent. So Dick LeBeau, as a defensive coordinator, needed to come up with a counter to that, because he's facing this team in practice all day, and he comes up with the zone blitz, where you're bringing – everybody's got assignments, and you're bringing the safety down to stop the run. Well, the blitzing safety or the cover safety, that and having a lineman drop back into coverage, that's all Dick LeBeau. That's all a result of trying to counter the West Coast offense that the Bengals and the 49ers were running. So, and the Fulcher is the pioneer of all that. He's you're drafting a big guy that can not only cover, but can take on a running back. Can put his head down and take him out. A Bob Sanders type. I mean, all that. David Fulcher was the first. So I can't emphasize his impact, and absolutely, deserves to be there in the top 10. Going through the rest of the list, James Brooks was our Gio Bernard of the 88-89 Super Bowl season. We had got him. We were well familiar with him. He was part of the run and shoot offense on San Diego by Eric Coryell and Dan Fouts. They had Chuck Muncie as their big back, and James Brooks was their change of pace kind of back. And that's he was just a perfect fit for our offense at that time. So kind of the tail end of Pete Johnson's career. We draft Ickey Woods. He's a rookie, and James Brooks is just a perfect complement to him. So once again, he belongs. He's right there, number 10. Kenny Riley's the guy. He got to play in the 81 Super Bowl. This guy belongs in the Hall of Fame. The Bengals get no respect. This is a guy with 65 career interceptions. I think he's number 5 on the all-time list. Just a ball hawk. Even though he played primarily corner, he was a ball hawk. He just had a nose for the ball. You don't get 65 interceptions in your career and not be a ball hawk. So Kenny Riley absolutely belongs in the Hall of Fame. He's fine where he is on this list, but it's a snub not having him in the Hall. I talked about Max Montoya being the start of our offensive line. And then Lamar Parrish was he didn't get to play in a Super Bowl. Great 70s player. He was a pure cover corner, Lamar Parrish, and he contributed a lot on special teams. I would compare him in his heyday to a Pacman Jones, but he didn't get into trouble. He was a high character guy. So that's who Lamar Parrish was. Great contributor. And I'm glad to see that he broke the top 20 there. Let's see if we can just hit some more highlights. I don't want to completely dominate this. Tommy Casanova's from that same secondary. I got to say, in the 70s, we gave the Steelers problems. We would win a game or be in every game against the Steelers. So we were never an easy out. Even during the heyday of the Steel Curtain, the Steelers would go 12-2, at the time it was 14 games. So they'd go like 10-4. One of their losses would be to us. So, we always held our own against them. Rodney Holman was kind of Boomer Esiason's Tyler Eifert. Big blocking, but he had some speed and he could run. When he got a head of steam going, it was fun watching Rodney Holman run down the field. So I think do we have Dan Ross in here? Yeah, Dan Ross, number 22. Dan Ross was Kenny Anderson's Tyler Eifert. And I think he set a record for Super Bowl, either yards or receptions in the Super Bowl. It's since then been broken, but there were a lot of records in that 81 Super Bowl. So, and Pat McAnally was the Ray Guy of our era. He was Harvard educated. So it was kind of interesting having a guy who went to Harvard. I think the only other Harvard guy I can think of is Ryan Fitzpatrick. I can't think of another Harvard guy playing ball, but yeah, he was the smartest punter to ever play the game. Well, we'll put Pat McAnally down for that. And, you know, without going back into the I don't know if we want to go back into the 70s, you know, pre-68 to 70s. I already told you that Greg Cook was one of those names I could pronounce. But Rookie of the Year, he tore his rotator cuff, and it was never diagnosed properly, and that shortened his career, and they only played a couple seasons. But to win Rookie of the Year on an expansion team, think about that. Nice. So that was Greg Cook. So he absolutely belonged there. I mean, he put us on the map. We were competitive from the get-go. We beat the Raiders, the Chiefs, and I can't remember, there's one other team. But these were winning, established AFL teams, and we beat them in our expansion season. So that said something about Greg Cook's ability and Paul Brown's ability to coach. So
what happened to him?
He tore his rotator cuff. It was never diagnosed. Remember, back then, these guys played with concussions. They were all considered replaceable. You know, it's these guys aren't making a lot of money, which is a shame because they really built the NFL. The guys making the $30 million now with these guaranteed contracts, the Kirk Cousins, they owe a lot to guys like Greg Cook in the early days who gave their bodies and didn't make a lot of money. And it just shortened his career. He just never was the same throwing as it got worse. I mean, you can imagine continuing to play with a torn rotator cuff. Right. Yeah, I think he played a couple years, but Rookie of the Year in 1968. So I think he passed away. I read he passed away in 2012. So unfortunately, he didn't live to see this list. But there's been a lot of exposés done. You know, people knew who he was. So
yeah. Definitely heard of Greg Cook as well. I think he played with Ken Riley, and I believe Ken Riley talked about how he could have ended up being, if he didn't get hurt, the best Bengals quarterback arguably of all time.
Oh, absolutely. He had all the skills. And I think there was a Cincinnati Innovations show, if anybody wants to check it out, on the Cincinnati Enquirer. But they talk about that, and they say how Paul Brown, Bill Walsh, and Sam Weish Sam Weish is now the quarterback on the team. They kind of develop what would be the Ohio River offense and the West Coast offense, whichever region you want to title it with. They kind of gave that team the whole idea of getting the ball out of the quarterback's hands quickly so he doesn't take that hit. I think kind of emerged out of how much we shortened Greg Cook's career. So.
Right. Definitely. Unfortunate. Well, Mark, we appreciate that on the 70s and the 80s. That's definitely great information. I'm glad that you were able to break that down for some of our fans who might not be familiar with that era. With that being said, me and G will get into the top 50 players included on this list from the 90s and the 2000s era. And obviously, this one was a no-brainer. Chad Johnson makes the list at number 4. We also have Corey Dillon, who makes the list at number 15. After that, we also have Willie Anderson, TJ Houshmandzadeh. Takeo Spikes also made the list as well, followed by Rudy Johnson, Rich Brom, Justin Smith. Brian Simmons comes in at 47, and it looks like Robert Geathers comes in at 49. G, what are some of your thoughts on some of those players selected?
Well, you forgot Mr. Whitworth at 25, who was a great lineman for us for a long time. One of the things that stands out the most for me is I love that Anthony Munoz is number 1, because not only was he a great player, he's one of those people that outside of Bengals, he did great things for the city of Cincinnati. Like, he had so many foundations. There are so many events. I remember as a kid going to events hosted by Anthony Munoz. So I think it's pretty sweet that he did great things for the Cincinnati Bengals as a player, but also did great things for our city too. And just looking at the list, I think that, I don't know. I love Chad Johnson. I'm actually happy that they gave him number 4, but there's a part of me that thinks that I don't know if he needs to be number 4. Maybe like top 15, but I don't know about number 4. He's a great receiver, and I think I'm very happy that they're looking at his actual statistics and not everything he did off the field. But I think that's like 4 is really, wow, that's a high placement for Chad Johnson. Just in my opinion. I think that Andrew Whitworth should be higher, but just because of not what he did on the field as much as a player, but for everything that he did for the locker room as well. But nice to see Rudy Johnson on the list and TJ Houshmandzadeh. Takeo Spikes was probably playing. That's when I first started getting into really paying attention to the Bengals football. So nice to hear his name because I remember some cool plays from him very young. Let's see, who else? Corey Dillon, I already said that. Good to see him down there in the top 15. I think that's a good place for him. But yeah, and then Kenny Anderson, that's my mom's favorite. So it's cool seeing his name too.
Right. I think obviously Chad Johnson. I think, like you said, some people did disagree with Chad being in the top 5. I didn't have too much of a problem with it. I think he was the only player from that 90s, 2000s era that was actually in the top 10, I believe, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
So it was kind of cool to see him in there. Corey Dillon, you guys already know how I feel about Corey Dillon. I was at the 278-yard game. To me, he definitely has been one of the best players in our franchise. He just ended up playing at the wrong time. So it would have been amazing to see what he could have done. And I guess like 2005, had he stuck around a little bit later and been able to run in that line with not only Willie Anderson, but Andrew Whitworth, Rich Brom, Eric Steinbach. I would have loved to have seen Corey Dillon run behind that line. So I think that they definitely got it right with having Corey Dillon definitely with the top 15. Willie Anderson, I mean, what can you not say about Willie Anderson? One of the best tackles outside of Anthony Munoz for this organization. I mean, Willie Anderson witnessed, I believe, the 90s. So he witnessed some of the bad and the good with the Bengals in 2005 and 2006. Then you look at TJ Houshmandzadeh, definitely has to make the list. It was a little bit overshadowed by Chad, but not necessarily. But definitely deserves some list as well. Takeo Spikes, I thought that this was pretty interesting. I'm glad that he made this list because I don't know what you guys' opinion is on this or what you've seen, but it seemed like I was watching something where Takeo Spikes was referring to himself as like a 49er or a Buffalo Bill. And it's like, no, buddy, you were a Cincinnati Bengal. We remember you fondly. So it's good to see that this organization, though he didn't stick around for the turnaround, still was able to reach out to him and honor him. And I think that also including Brian Simmons was perfect because Brian Simmons essentially was a little bit of the guy who stuck around after Takeo Spikes left and kind of ascended to that linebacker position and was one of the leaders on defense during that Marvin Lewis era and before the Marvin Lewis era. Justin Smith, I mean, this guy has to make the list. How can he not make the list? A lot of NFL fans that aren't familiar with his career with the Bengals think that he was a guy that started his career with the 49ers. And we all know as fans, Justin Smith started Bengals. You know, essentially he was our Carlos Dunlap of that early era. I also see Robert Geathers, who I'm kind of split on, and I know that me and Mark kind of talked about this before the show, and I think that Mark gave the perfect analogy to him, or comparison, and said that he was more so kind of like a Michael Johnson. He needed another force across from him, like a Carlos Dunlap, in order to be effective. And I totally agree with that. I'm not sure, in my opinion, if he should have made the list, but he was right at 49, so I can't really argue with that either. But my memories of Robert Geathers are that he came on very strong one year. I believe he had 10.5 sacks or something like that. The Bengals ended up signing him to a huge contract, and he just never kind of lived up to that. But he was a great locker room guy. He was a great leader. So he was one of those guys kind of in the Domata Peko mode that kind of stuck around because he was a core locker room leader and core locker room guy. And they didn't cut him when some fans might have thought that he was overpaid. So all in all, I think that the Bengals definitely got this list right. When you listen to what Mark said about some of the players from the 70s and 80s, and you hear what me and G have to say about some of those players, it's clear that it seems like they got this list right. So moving on, Mark, me and G, we actually a couple of weeks ago did our list of our top 5 favorite Cincinnati Bengals players. We definitely got a lot of flack because we're clearly from the late 90s and 2000s kind of era. But please give us your top 5 favorite Bengals of all time list.
Okay, you know what? I'm going to do that. I've got them here ready. One of the things I want to point out, it's funny, if you remember recently in an interview, Dick LeBeau said he sees himself more as a Bengal than he does as a Steeler or a Titan or any of the other teams that he coached for. And even though he's won a Super Bowl with the Steelers as their defensive coordinator, he still identifies himself as a Bengal because he was our head coach for a short period of time. And he went to the Super Bowl with Sam Weiss. And it's interesting. I think when players have different accomplishments, they'll see themselves as, you know, identifying with that team. You know, we were talking about Justin Smith. We were talking about Takeo Spikes. Those guys really, you're part of it. Anybody who came into that lost decade, that 90s team that was just, well, you know, we were the losingest team of the decade. I mean, while the Niners and the Cowboys each won over 100 games, we lost 100 games in the 90s. It's just a lost era. You know, Paul Brown dies. Mike Brown won't really go out and get help. And so we have this lot, and doesn't know how to draft. Achilles Smith. So players that were associated with that era won't associate with us, even though they were drafted. Justin Smith couldn't wait to get out of town, and neither could Takeo Spikes. As soon as their rookie contracts were up, they were gone. So they're not going to identify with us, where you have other guys. Andrew Whitworth will sign a one-day contract and retire a Bengal. There's no question about it. He's still right now mentoring Ogbuehi because he feels that commitment to him. So even though it's a huge, and I agreed with Gina about Whitworth should have been hired just because of his locker room leadership. That should have got him into the top 20, hands down. But my top 5, I went with, no surprise, Anthony Munoz. The top 3 are right. I mean, you have Munoz, Anderson, Crumry. I mean, those guys redefined their positions. They were dominant. They played long careers. I mean, you're looking at, 12 years, 15 years. These are long careers and they all played with just one team. Okay. And then David Fulcher, I talked about, he has to be number 4. Redefine the position. I mean, he set the stage for all the safeties that come later. And then Kenny Riley, I told you, should be in the Hall of Fame. It's a snub right now that he's not in the Hall of Fame. I really wish they would put him in while he's alive versus putting him in there where he's not, where he won't be alive to see it. So I really think those would be my top 5, just all time. So I think you can't, as much as we have had some accomplishments, but you can't overlook. I mean, these teams won playoff games. They got to the Super Bowl. We were, 12-4. Everybody was touting the year we had the meltdown. Everybody was touting us as, this is the team, 12-4. We the last time we were 12-4, we ran the table, went to the Super Bowl. Well, we obviously weren't able to do that. So I think you have to take the top 5. All have to come from those 2 Super Bowl teams. They just have to. So
right. I totally agree. I definitely understand why that would make up your list, and I'm glad that you were able to give a list like that for those fans who did go through that experience, are familiar with the history and everything like that.
Yeah, my
Mark,
pleasure.
we appreciate time and coming on here and breaking things down. But before you go, make sure you definitely let people know where they can find your stuff.
Okay, well, like I said, my Twitter is LA Bengal Fan on Twitter. Also, I am LA Bengal Fan on Facebook, and I am one of the Bengal representatives on the AFC Northerners show, and that's available also at AFC Northerners on Twitter, Reddit. I'm Mark_AFC Northerners on Reddit, so you'll see me chime in a lot on Reddit. I use the AFC Northerners account to do that. So, and I love to talk to everybody. And then AFC Northerners is also available. We have our own YouTube channel as well. So I think we appeared on your show a year or so ago. With the 4 of us. So, and that's a different show. It's a show if you want to watch guys talking smack to one another, because I have to sit there. As hard as it is, I have to sit on a sofa with a Ravens guy, a Browns guy, and a Steeler guy. So it's just a lot more pleasurable not having to try to cut someone off before they start bashing us, sitting around Bengal Ken. So very much enjoyed being here today, and I thank you guys for including me.
Awesome. Thank you.
All right, so moving on, me and G are going to talk about, obviously, the biggest nugget of Bengals news this week. And we heard about Pacman Jones being suspended. He was suspended for 1 game, which isn't too bad. But G, what are your thoughts on Pacman being suspended?
1 game is not enough. I don't know. I really do think that Pacman Jones has done some great things for the Cincinnati Bengals. I do. But it comes a point where it's like, when are you going to learn your lesson? And I feel like he's come past that point where you're old enough to realize that, why are you still doing these crazy things? And why are you still acting surprised when you get a suspension? And then also, why are we complaining about a 1-game suspension? It's just, he should just, and that's a big hope.
True. I totally understand. I think, honestly, I think that he kind of got off with a little bit of a smack on the wrist a little bit in terms of his suspension, which I think kind of makes sense given the circumstances, since with the whole legal process, things didn't really turn out too bad with him being charged or anything like that. I think it was just like some misdemeanors or things of that nature. The major charges were dismissed. So it seemed like the NFL just wanted to give him the slap on the wrist. But to me, I kind of assumed that he would probably be suspended 2 games. So I was kind of shocked that it was only 1 game. But I think that I actually like the fact that he will be suspended because we can actually get some of those guys like William Jackson III in there, and also Darqueze Dennard. We haven't been able to see these guys because, you know, the corner room has been so deep. And since it's so deep, these guys haven't been able to get on the field. So I like the fact that this will allow them to actually get some experience, not only in preseason, but also some game action. And I'm very excited about this because I'm not really that huge of a Darqueze Dennard fan, but I think that it opens the door to let William Jackson III, our 2015 first-round draft pick, I think it allows him to get onto the field because when you look at him, he's an outside corner. He can't really play in the slot. Darqueze Dennard has played in the slot, so to me it would seem that they would probably start Darqueze Dennard in the slot and possibly start William Jackson III on the outside. And I even think that Jeff Hobson tweeted something saying that the last time a rookie cornerback has, and I guess they look at William Jackson III as a rookie since he didn't play last year, they said that last time that a rookie cornerback was able to start during a regular season game, it was Leon Hall. And he said, will history repeat itself? I think that that's very exciting. The only thing is, I don't think that 1 game will give him enough. Unless the guy has like 2 or 3 interceptions in the first game, I don't think that it's going to be enough for him to get into that starting lineup. So I think that while, you know, the 1 game isn't too bad, I still think that it gives us a good look at some of those other guys. And I guess that's an alternative way to look at it. What do you think about William III getting the opportunity, G?
Well, I mean, I think that they're going to get the opportunities to play in the preseason too. Right. So I think it's kind of like, it's almost like a 5-game type of tryout for them. And I think by the time they get to that game opener, be comfortable enough on the field to where they can show us what they can really do. Because, I mean, this is our future secondary. I mean, Pacman Jones doesn't have too many more years left, if any, if we're going to hold on to him. So it's time to let these people that we haven't let see too much play time, let them see some action on the field. And I think it's exciting to see our future secondary younger players start getting out there and getting some playing time. And like when it comes to the aspect of him being suspended in 1 game not being enough for them, I think that's right too. Like if maybe we could get him on a 2-3 game suspension, that might be enough to us to see what those secondary players, those safeties can actually do out there on the field. But yeah, I'm over Pacman Jones and hearing about suspensions at this point in his career. But I am excited about young players doing great things.
Right, I totally agree. And with that first game being the home opener, I believe against the Baltimore Ravens, I don't really think that, you know, Pacman missing that game is really going to be a huge hit. I believe there's a possibility that he could fight the suspension, which I don't really understand why he would even fight that when it was only 1 game. But I don't think it's a dire game that we'd actually need Pacman out there. I mean, yes, they have Jeremy Maclin, but, you know, given the tandem of Drake Kirkpatrick with William Jackson III and Darqueze Dennard, I think that they should be fine. I mean, unless Josh Shaw comes out from nowhere, he could possibly be in the mix as well. Me, in my honest opinion, I think that Josh Shaw is better than Darqueze Dennard, but it seems like they want to give Dennard a chance for some reason. But I think between those guys, I think we'll be good against the Ravens.
Well, yeah, I mean, to me, I'm a very competitive person, so I like to think of it as like this is your tryout. Like you get 1 game to try out to show us what you're gonna do for the rest of the season. And I feel like if this safety or whoever's gonna be, if it's gonna be Dennard, if it's gonna be Jackson III, if it's going to be him or either one, like this is your opportunity to show us. And if that's going to be you, then, you know, we'll see. And if you have a great game, then we might see them on the field before we see Pacman Jones. So it's like, this is your opportunity to be the starter or continue to be a backup. And I think that's how serious it is. Like if these guys come out or one person comes out and just has an amazing game 1, Like, hey, maybe he's starting in front of Pacman Jones, and I'm not upset about that. So show us what you got.
Well, just some bonus material, G. I know we did the top 50 and all of that, but how can we not talk about training camp starting next week? Obviously, camp kicking off. What are some things, or who are some players that you're kind of looking for through training camp next week? If you could highlight, I guess, some of the players or situations that you're looking at.
Homeboy Eifert, I want to see where he's at. I want to see what you can do right now. I know you're recovering. I know you may not be 100%, but I want to see, like, if you're actually making some effort to be at day one training camp and actually put some kind of work in to what, as far as you can go, push yourself to your limit, just to see, like, I mean, like we said last week, like, it really concerns me that this guy has yet to play a full season. So I feel like that's the person that I'm really looking at training camp and watching his healing process to see him prepare for a full season of football. I'm definitely looking at our new rookies. You're looking at John Ross. You're looking at Mixon. You want to see how well they're gelling with the other teammates, how well they're paying attention, like if they're like motivated and focused, or, hey, I made it, maybe I can fall back for a little bit. And also just the way Andy Dalton is going to be, I just want to see Andy Dalton as a leader. I want to see how he's talking to these new rookies, how he's talking to his offense, because we saw that video last year of him giving the pep talk, and Andy's just not that moving. Like, I want to see how he's pushing these new people, how he's working this offense. Like, I want to see him step up a little bit. So that's what I'm looking for training camp.
Definitely. Those were
Montez. I love Montez Burfict.
Definitely have to see what Montez is going to look like. And I think that goes the same. I want to see, how much better he can be. It's almost scary thinking that there's another level that he can go to.
I swear it's another level.
Is definitely going to be huge. I kind of want to see a couple of players. So I'm going to be paying attention to, of course, the rookies, like you said, with John Ross and Joe Mixon. I also want to see what teams they're working with, whether they're working with first team offense, second team. But I'm also going to be looking at the linebacker that we just brought in from the Cardinals. His name escapes me at the moment.
Foster.
There it is. Kevin Minter. I definitely want to see what Kevin Minter is going to be doing. I definitely want to take a look and see where they put Vigil in. Apparently, Vigil's supposed to be one of those starting linebackers as well. I'm also going to be looking at, obviously, everybody's been talking about the offensive line. I don't think that they're going to do as bad as people really think, but I'll definitely be looking at that offensive line during training camp if we can actually, I guess, get any notes or tweets about what's going on there. But definitely I'll have my eyes on them. Honestly, it's funny because we're friends with a couple of people who interact with some of the players. And Montez Burfict last year said that he knew that Cedric Ogbuehi wasn't ready just from how he practiced against him in training camp. So I think we'll get the real spill exactly on what the difference is between last year and this year. And to Ogbuehi's credit, he's definitely done a lot of off-season training, and I think he did like some MMA tactics or something to help him against the bull rush and stuff this year. So I think that Ogbuehi is definitely taking it on himself to definitely step up his game. I'm going to be looking at him, not just him, because a lot of people just focus on Ogbuehi, but Jake Fisher wasn't really that good last year either. So I'm also looking at him. And from what I've heard, I believe Jake Fisher has put on 25 pounds. So seeing how our young tackles stand up in training camp will tell us a lot, because we have a lot of talent on the defensive line. Keeping it to the defensive line, I'm also going to be looking at the rookies that we have over there. Jordan Willis, how many times is he going to be rotated in with the first team defense? How is he going to split snaps with Michael Johnson? Is he going to blow up, Kemp? Is that going to reflect our offensive line or our defensive line? It's going to be hard to tell. Also, I'm going to pay attention to Carl Lawson, and he's another edge rusher who they plan on working at linebacker and defensive end. I kind of want to see what he's going to do. But other than that, I'm really just ready for football to get started. I'm ready to see this team. I don't think that there's been a season where I've been this excited going into the season, just with all of the weapons and all of the question marks, especially like you said, G, with Joe Mixon. I mean, man, from what we've heard through the grapevine, through people who have spoken to Vontaze and AJ Green, they believe that this guy could go to the Pro Bowl his rookie year, which I was kind of taken back by that, just because they've only seen him in minicamp. So imagine what the guy's going to be in full pads.
Yeah. So do you think that you'll see, like, will there be any surprises for training camp? Will there be any, like, off the field issues? Will there be anybody who just doesn't show up? Will it just be like everything will go smoothly, or do you anticipate any surprises along the way?
I think we're going to get some surprises. And, I mean, you always get surprises in training camp. I think one surprise last year, which was a bad surprise, was Andrew Billings going down. So I think that we're going to get surprises with injuries. But I also think that there's going to be somebody that we're not talking about right now. And it happens every offseason, every preseason, that's going to come out and take off. And I hope that player can be, in my opinion, I hope that the player can be Paul Dawson, because Paul Dawson is somewhat on the chopping block. But if Paul Dawson blows up in this preseason, how can you not put him? And I understand there's a lot of people that like Vigil. I'm not saying that I'm in the camp that hates Vigil. I just think that you could potentially have 3 studs at linebacker if you have Dawson, Minter, and Burfict. And I mean, obviously, with us playing in a nickel package, Vigil can still get a whole bunch of snaps. But I would like to see that surprise player be Paul Dawson. I mean, and last year we saw it with the wide receiver. His name escapes me at the moment, but the returner Erickson.
LeBeau?
There's going to be some player that does that. So I'd like to see that. I'd also like to see, and this isn't necessarily like from a talent perspective or anything like that, but I'd love to see Montez Burfict get his extension during training camp.
Yeah.
I'd love to see that.
Well, I mean, you mentioned someone I forgot to mention is Michael Johnson. Like, he's one that's going to be on the chopping block for real, for real. I love to see him show us the Michael Johnson that we've seen in previous years. Like 3 years ago, Michael Johnson, I think it was. Right. I want to see him bring that back, because I think that type of, like, play from a leader like or a veteran like that will get everybody hyped and will just bring everybody's morale up. Like, when you see Michael Johnson back in the shape that we've seen him before, I think that will get the whole defense all hyped. I think it'd be great.
One last surprise that I think I totally agree with you with Michael Johnson. One last surprise I think would be a good surprise is if John Ross is cleared to practice day 1 of training camp. That would be a huge
I forgot about the injury.
Right. He's got that, I think it's like a torn labrum. So it's what William Jackson III had last year. He actually played with that injury the entire time at Washington. But the Bengals wanted to shut him down and let him heal from that injury. And I think that that's the smart thing to do. Obviously, I think they've talked to Ross, and he said that he feels like he could go now, but the Bengals just kind of want to keep him at bay and make sure that injury is pretty much secure, because, I mean, you're talking about the NFL now. So
right. You're talking about your future.
Right. And that's our future. Oh, one thing I want to bring up, G, just listening to some teams outside of Cincinnati, it also came out this week that Mike Williams, who was drafted by the Chargers, could potentially miss the entire season with a back injury. Now, he's kind of disputed this a little bit, but it's kind of crazy to see that Mike Williams is the guy who could potentially be the guy struggling with injuries over John Ross. What are your thoughts on that?
Dang, that's crazy. I didn't hear about Mike Williams and the injury like that, but that is a surprise. If he misses the whole season, what was he doing?
I have no idea. Apparently,
here, go sit down. Wait for camp. I'm just playing, but yeah, that's a big loss though.
Right, and some Bengals fans actually, there was a group that Mike Williams over John Ross because of the whole injury thing, but it's just kind of ironic that Mike Williams ends up being the guy, that ends up getting hurt. I think it's just the curse of people named Mike Williams in the NFL. It just doesn't seem to end pretty good for those guys.
It's like, well, I mean, I guess it is kind of like a curse. Every year you're going to have that rookie who's going to have that injury, and it's just like, dang, we thought she was going to do it this year, but maybe we'll have to wait another year to see what it is. But yeah, I'm over here looking at it now. I did not see that, but he is denying it.
Right. players are always going to deny it. But to me, okay, if you're not out for the season, you're definitely not starting to get the season opener. Like, you're definitely
right. And I mean, you talking about a back injury, that ain't nothing to really shrug off.
Right, exactly. I don't know how that wasn't caught by any of the medical staff. Yeah, that sucks for them.
Yeah.
Definitely sucks.
At least they're not over here playing us.
Right, exactly. That's one thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to say a prayer before we start this training camp next week, because we do not need any kind of crazy injuries or anything like that. The last thing that I want to see, and I'm going to knock on wood, I do not want to see, John Ross is down on the field. The tweet that I do not want to see throughout this entire experience.
Who?
John Ross.
No. No, I mean,
I do not.
I don't want to see Vontaze Burfict on I want to see him play all 16 games this season. That's the one I want to see all games. But I mean, yeah, we want to see the rookies too. We want to see them too. But man, I want to see that. I want to see that Zimmer defense in full, like, going hard. Not Zimmer, of course, now, but like where we were before. Like, I just want to see that defense pop again. So.
Yeah, the defense is going to be definitely exciting to watch, and I kind of want to see what some of the matchups are going to be in terms of cornerbacks on wide receivers. So, are we going to get to see, John Ross versus William Jackson III? Are we going to see if Darqueze Dennard can stick up with somebody like an AJ or a Tyler Boyd? I really want to see how those battles are going to kind of, in a sense, go. And I'm not sure. I know we usually do like the whole team session, like where we intermix different NFL teams or whatever. They practice that whole week together. I'm not sure if they're doing it here. I'm pretty sure they probably would, because I think they've done it the last 2 years.
I think they do, like, during preseason, right? Like that practice for a team, they would practice with them that week.
Right, exactly. So, that's basically what I'm looking forward to. G, did you want to give them any information on your fantasy? Did you want to give them an update on that?
Still working on it. I was sorry, I'm a little late posting videos. Recorded my video, didn't like my video, lost my voice, and have to re-record it, and I will post it hopefully this week, and hopefully my voice doesn't go out this week. I coach like 25 hours a week, so my voice sometimes lets me down, but hopefully I'll stay in long enough so I can re-record this video and get some stuff posted for you guys to keep you updated on the fantasy guide.
Right, I'm pretty sure that's a problem Marvin Lewis never has, because he never yells at anybody. It seems like
problems Marvin never has, or Andy for that matter.
Right, but as you guys know, we're doing this giveaway where we're giving away the Chad Johnson autographed picture. So make sure that you guys subscribe. We're at, I believe, 508 subscribers now. But once we reach 1,000, we'll definitely be doing a giveaway. So one of you lucky followers that subscribe to New Stripe City is definitely going to have a chance to get. Why wouldn't you want that? The guy was just named the number 4 Bengal on the first 50 Bengals list. So you would actually be able to have a chance at adding some cool memorabilia, kind of like Mark that we had on here. I mean, the guy had so much memorabilia in the background. So why wouldn't you want to add a piece to your collection? But as usual, guys, thanks for tuning in, and we'll leave you guys with a Who Day all day, every day, and especially on Sunday.
Bye, guys.